Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 51, There Be Whales Here. We'll start off with some Star Trek news, and then we'll talk about Star Trek Discovery, Season 4, Episode 3, Choose to Live.
And then we'll get into our audience question right after our main topic, There Be Whales Here. We're going to be talking about Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, which celebrated its 35th anniversary just last week. It's going to be a great show. Stick around. I'm starting to sound like a late night talk show host, you know? every night. We got a great show for you tonight. Just once I want him to come on and say, the show's going to be less than good today, but I hope you'll forgive us and stay around anyway.
But we all know we always have a great show. So.
We do. We have fantastic shows. Never a bum episode, people. I defy you to show me a bad episode of our podcast. Actually, don't do that. So, Mike, how are you?
I'm well. I'm well, Kevin, and I have to congratulate you. You did not tell me you had a new job working for La La Land Records.
I do not know what you're talking about.
Well, remember a few weeks ago you brought as your Star Trek news the new edition of the Star Trek II soundtrack. Yes. And I said, I have so many copies of that already. Why would I want another one? Yes. And she said, it's remastered and it's going to sound great. And so wouldn't you know it, I found myself on their website and it was back in stock. And I thought, well, Kevin says a remastered soundtrack is worth it. And I got the thing and it does sound pretty great. So I have you to thank for me now owning my third CD version of the Star Trek II soundtrack by James Horner. But it is a nice release, and it does sound good. So they should really, give you a cut of that purchase.
At least that one sale. I should get like $1.25 off it or something. Come on, La La Land, quit holding out. Hashtag
be our
not
sponsor.
Spawn. Not Spawn.
They can sponsor us.
They can sponsor us. Yes, that'd be great. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I have not been able to get that myself, but that's really cool. That's something I'm gonna, put on my Christmas list or something, I guess.
There you go. If you've been a very good boy, maybe.
Mike, I have a feeling that you have Star Trek news to share.
I do have some Star Trek news, and as we are especially big fans of Nichelle Nichols around here, kind of bittersweet Star Trek news. She appeared at Comic-Con LA just, I think, yesterday as we record this to make her final public appearance. And apparently, although, of course, it's sad that she will no longer be able to make public appearances, apparently she was all smiles during the appearance, blowing kisses and waving, and she signed autographs. And she didn't make any public statements herself, but there were many tributes to her recorded and live there in person at the event. And during the event, NASA astronaut appearance specialist Denise Young, who says Nichelle Nichols' work with NASA that we've talked about on our show inspired her to go into NASA, gave Nichelle Nichols the prestigious NASA Exceptional Public Achievement Medal for her 4 decades of activism in diversifying NASA's ranks.
Oh, that's awesome.
And apparently she got out of her wheelchair to accept the award, and she received a standing ovation from the crowd. So must have been a beautiful moment and certainly well-earned recognition and affection for Nichelle Nichols.
Oh, that is wonderful and beautiful. Larry Nemechek tweeted out a photo like backstage before her event or whatever of him and Nichelle. And, it was just so sweet. And then he also showed the line of people, the people who were lined up. I think it was the day before they actually did the autograph appearance or whatever. And it showed the line of people that were lined up to buy tickets to see her. That's one of those things I wish I'd been at. I've told the story before of Leonard Nimoy coming to town here at Dallas Comic Con. And I thought, I'll see him next time, because I couldn't afford, to do the ticket to go see him or whatever.
Yeah.
And that ended up being his last. It was just a couple weeks later he announced he was retiring from conventions.
Yeah.
So, you never know. I mean, at least now we know, and it's, it's her last appearance. And I don't think she's been at a convention in a while.
No,
Her
I think
health
there was a
hasn't been
big farewell show planned before the pandemic, and then that didn't happen. But this was, I think, quite a nice event from all I've read about it, and we can put links in the show notes. But it's nice that she got a proper send-off from the convention circuit, where people do know this is the last time, so we're going to make it really special.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, and the NASA honor is fantastic and well deserved. As we have covered on the show at length, go listen to Woman in Motion and Making Woman in Motion, our 2 episodes about the Nichelle Nichols documentary. Great stuff. We got to interview the crew from the film.
Yeah, that was
fantastic.
Certainly one of the highlights of our first season, for sure.
It certainly was. It's been a highlight of the show so far. I mean, that's been fantastic. It's one of my favorite episodes. But go check that out. You hear some really cool stuff. Well, I have a piece of news. There's actually an Amazon original documentary coming out called Shatner in Space, about Bill Shatner's trip to space. Which I just want to say,
sounds familiar.
The title might sound familiar. We have an episode called Shatner in Space. Now, granted, the episode title of our episode is properly read Shatner in Space. You have to do it like that every time, or you're mispronouncing it. But
do you think the Amazon documentary will start that way?
I would love it if it did. I really do. But they'd probably have to give Brian Henson money, so maybe they wouldn't do it.
No.
So it's cool that it's going to be on Amazon Prime Video. It premieres December 15th, so not long from now.
Gosh, that's just like next week.
Yeah, it is, in the U.S. and in UK and in Australia and in Canada and in New Zealand, but it will arrive in other countries early next year. So that's pretty cool. And they have this image for it, the not a poster, but the image for the series, for the documentary, and it's Shatner next to the window of the Blue Origin. And there's a reflection of him as Kirk, in the window, in the little Enterprise out there, and I was just thinking it's just a good thing that when he was sitting at that window, there wasn't some goblin outside.
I was thinking the same thing. You're right.
It just totally reminded me of that.
Yes, that's a great. They've captured many facets of his career with that one.
Yes. Bill Shatner next to a window in an aeronautic craft. That's golden. So, yeah, excited about that.
So, something else unusual. We weren't speaking of unusual things. Just like, I find a better way into that.
Hey, that was better than my transitions last week. It's good.
Well, okay. So one other piece of Star Trek news I found, and I don't pretend to understand it all, but it sounds new and kind of cool. Roddenberry Entertainment has created a non-fungible token of Gene Roddenberry's signature on the first ever Star Trek contract. So that's unique in itself. NFTs are a big deal and getting lots of buzz, and I don't pretend to quite wrap my mind around them. But this NFT is being stored on the DNA code of bacteria. It's being built as the first ever living ecological non-fungible token.
Wow, I mean, a lot of people don't understand the non-fungible token thing, and I kind of want to explain it as best I can.
Go for it.
It is a non-fungible token as opposed to a fungible token, which is, of course, a token that you can funge. A non-fungible token you cannot funge, and that's what makes it unique.
That makes all the sense in the world. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I try to clear these things up for everybody who
The
may
more
not
you know.
understand. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Yeah, they never tell you that though. They say the more you know. The more you know what? What?
The more you know what they've just said. maybe we can get Kate Mulgrew to explain it on one of her Prodigy,
there you go.
lessons for the week.
There you go.
This week, the crew learned about non-fungible tokens. There are non-fungible tokens in that nebula, crew.
Oh boy.
Well, the thing, even though these non-fungible tokens are supposed to be unique, right? This one, because it's in bacteria, it replicates and duplicates itself like 1 billion times per night. But the very first one has been dubbed El Primero in Spanish, and so that's how they identify the. I don't know. It sounds weird and kind of cool and kind of nerdy and kind of cutting edge all at the same time. So it sounds like I think Gene Roddenberry would have heartily approved.
Hey, as long as it brings money into the the Roddenberry coffers, he'd be happy about that. That's he made no.
You want to know my vision? No, I don't mean to reduce.
That's a little reference
I don't
to last week.
mean to reduce the vision to that, but we were just talking about that last week, so it's fresh in my mind.
Yeah, well, that's a great callback. That was wonderful. But yeah, Gene made no. He wasn't ashamed that he wanted to earn money.
Well, yeah, I mean, no, there's no shame. There's no shame in it. What was that line Tevye has in Fiddler on the Roof? He says, I know it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great one.
Oh my.
Oh my.
So have we got through the Star Trek news?
We've gotten through the Star Trek news.
All right.
Well, that was quite a ride. And speaking of rides, this week's episode of Discovery.
Oh, well, it was. It was.
It was quite a ride.
I tell you what, if they are not planning a Qowat Milat spin-off series over there, the Mountain of Entertainment, then they are missing a golden opportunity. Because I would, based on the strength of Choose to Live, I would watch it. I mean, I've seen Picard, but the Qowat Milat, I mean, they didn't make a big impression on me for whatever reason. I guess I was too caught up in Patrick Stewart's playing Picard again. I paid more attention to other aspects of Picard.
Yeah.
But man, the Bene Gesserit from the Dune universe are getting a lot of press these days because of the new movie. But I will, when it comes to religious sci-fi sisterhoods with grand overarching missions, I'll take the Qowat Milat over the Bene Gesserit anytime, because the Bene Gesserit go into planets and manipulate the culture and plant myths for propaganda purposes, and they're all about control, But the Qowat Milat are these nuns who devote themselves to being the champions of lost causes. It's a very noble mission. And this episode, we've got one who kind of goes rogue, right? And pursues a lost cause that others don't know about and that she feels she can't reveal to others. And I mean, it's a gripping episode. I found it very dramatic. I thought there were a lot of really strong performances in this episode, especially from Aisha Mansour Gonsalves, who plays Javeni, and Sonia Son, who's returning as Dr. Burnham, Captain Burnham's mother. And also, I doff my hat, especially this week, to Mary Wiseman as Tilly. I thought those were the three strongest performances in the episode. That was full of good performances. But that whole storyline with the joint mission to recover Javeni and finding out what her mission was. It had a kind of a Heart of Darkness vibe at the beginning, like we're going after this person who's disappeared off the radar. But it turned into a very uplifting story. So I guess I'm saying I loved the episode. I don't know what you thought about it, but what did you think?
I enjoyed it greatly. It's so much of Discovery right now for me is just the joy of being back in Discovery. I'm finally wearing my disco shirt this week. I've been meaning to wear it the past couple weeks, and I haven't done it. But I haven't worn this shirt since last season, and so it's back, and I'm happy. Disco is really my home these days for Star Trek. I don't know if I've mentioned that on the show before, but I love all the other series, but even including Picard, of all the new shows, Disco is just where I live. I really love this series, and I love the evolution that it's gone through. As it's changed hands, from different showrunners.
Yeah.
I think the Michelle Paradise era is one of the best eras in Star Trek. It's really, really great. And yeah, this is a great episode. I really enjoyed it. And like you said, Sylvia's character is growing in so many ways. And I think it was great in this episode because she's got this thing to work on, to get this thing that she sabotaged running again. She's like, oh, it's going to take me a while. I really messed this up.
This thing.
Yeah. I'll bet it's going to take you exactly how many minutes it takes to get everything else done, because Tilly can science around, and until she's like, this is going to take as long as it needs to take, people, because
it's funny. I took that as kind of a genuine, boy, I didn't realize how badly I'd fouled things up in your engine.
Yeah,
before.
she very well might have, but at the same time, I kind of thought she could be saying that just to stretch this out as long as it needs to go.
Well, she could be. I was equally impressed with, last week I had expressed some reservations about understanding the importance of telling stories about dealing with trauma, but are we going to do exactly the same thing? But I was pleased to see Tilly's trauma storyline this season, to the extent that there is one, is going in a slightly different direction than Detmer's did. Tilly's is going to be about stepping outside one's comfort zone and, finding what you want to do with your life. And I mean, not that broadly, I guess, in Tilly's case, but that's what it made me think of, as those times in life where I've been thinking, what am I going to do? What should I do?
Right.
And I really liked all the things she did to push herself. And I liked the moment where she's, they're not going to use phasers out of deference to the Qowat Milat. They're going to use swords, and she takes one and tries to swing it and falls. This is way outside my comfort zone.
But we'll be fine. Don't worry. We'll be fine, right?
Right.
Yeah, that was great. And I love that Saru sent her on this mission, too.
Yeah.
It's cool because he's back, and he's kind of taking that mentor role with her again. And I love seeing him provide that sort of gentle guidance, and she figured it out too, which is, of course, she did. But it was really great to see her. It's always great to see her pushing and growing into new spaces, and she's been forced to do that at various times, in the series. And it's nice to see her sort of more actively choosing it at this point, and I think that is good for her character, good for her growth. And the other thing that really interested me, or the other major storyline that I connected with, was Adira and Gray's story in this episode, and Gray getting his body, which, is happening faster than I expected it to. But I think in a lot of ways, our slower expectations for some of these developments is because we're used to TV series that have 26 episodes per season. And, we just don't have that, in this era anymore. I believe we are getting 13 episodes. I hear through the subspace grapevine that we're going to get 13 episodes this season. So that's good. That's a good number, solid number. But to pull it back, I really liked seeing how those two characters interacted.
Those were some beautiful moments between Adira and Gray. They reminded me a lot. The scene where Adira is talking to Gray as he's unconscious in sickbay reminded me so much of McCoy talking to Spock in Star Trek III.
Oh,
in
yeah.
a similar situation.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, well, that's just a beautiful, not only character moment, but also a callback to another beautiful character moment in the franchise. I felt that story was... got the short end of the straw this week. It was the kind of the C plot, because I thought the B plot with Stamets and Book going to Nivar to discuss the anomaly got more attention than the Gray's body subplot. Both are strong subplots, and both you could spend a whole episode on, of course. But
Right.
I was pleased to see, again, referencing some of my reservations from last week, they're not just going to drop the Stamets and Book relationship. They took it in a slightly different direction this week, where Stamets was really concerned that it might be re-traumatizing for Book to go and hear about a clinical forensic discussion of Quajan's destruction. And I thought it was very nice that Stamets had that concern, but Book, also asserting, no, I need to do this. I want to help however I can. And, kind of gently telling Stamets, it's not your place to decide what I need or don't need. And that was a theme in last week's episode too, I guess, because Culber advised Stamets to let Book lead in terms of that relationship.
But at the same time, it's sweet and it's endearing,
Oh yeah, it was only meant as a
to see his concern for Book, which is I mean, more than just from a sentimental angle. I mean, that's a good thing to be conscious of with people, and
Absolutely.
It's a reminder, to be conscious of those things. A lot of people don't think about that. A lot of people expect, people to testify on witness stands and stuff, and why don't you just do it? Well, there's a lot going on emotionally, psychologically surrounding that sort of re-traumatization and calling on people to relive those things. So yeah, I think it's great. Like you said, it's wonderful to see that relationship extended and deepened, and yeah, it was a good growth time for both of those characters.
I really liked seeing Tarina again, the president of Nivar.
Yeah, I love her.
Yeah, I really enjoy that character, and she, I think, is approaching movie era Spock levels of appreciating emotion for those who need to express emotion, and yet adhering to her own philosophy of logic. She was, that's about the most compassionate I can remember seeing a Vulcan be towards someone about an emotional matter. I mean, I know there's other moments, but that one just really, I thought was, as I was watching it, thinking, wow, she's got that same balance that Spock had, or a similar balance. Anyway.
That sensitivity is so great in her, and even that moment. I mean, that mind meld is so important for Book, and even just him having that moment where he's like, no, don't go yet, hang on, I need to see this. And for him to be able to have that moment, gosh, so many people don't get that kind of opportunity. Most people don't get anything close to that kind of opportunity. It's something we have to realize through a lot of therapy, or through a lot of, a lot of reassurance from people who are close to us, and to be able to look at his nephew and say, yeah, he knew I loved him,
right.
He knew it. And to not feel like he had fallen short to that point as an uncle. I think that's really, really cool. And to see that give him some relief and some resolution and some ability to move forward and kind of get out of the deepest, darkest place of his grief. Obviously, he's going to have more grief. But to get out of that depth that he was in of depression, that was a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Do you think that Stamets was a little stupid, though, not realizing the scientists were going into meditation to... I thought that was the only moment in the episode where I said, oh, come on now.
Well, and that's one of those things. That's one of those things about Paul, is that he is so... And part of it is the compassion, actually, that he has as a character, the concern that he has for others. When we first met him early in the series, he came off very stiff and very gruff, and a lot of that had to do with his a sort of self-protective mode that he was in, especially probably under Captain Lorca.
Oh well, sure. I mean,
but also he does have that. I mean, he's an intense nerd, and he wants to solve the science problem. He already has that motor going in him. But then when there is some human, some personal, some well, I shouldn't just say human, but some personal need, some pressing reason that lives are on the line, he's going to be very direct and to the point and impatient to get the solution there. And so that was to me a very Paul moment, where he is just like so driven by his intensity and his impatience that he says something really dumb.
Okay, I'll buy that.
Just
I'll buy that.
Very, very like, Paul, stop talking. Stop talking now. Stop. Talk. I will say fewer words, right? It was just, that was.
Well, I like the way you framed that moment. Yeah, I'll buy that.
I couldn't wait for it to be over. That was the most uncomfortable moment. But very much in keeping with his character. Yes. And yes, he should have known better, for sure. Absolutely.
They've had Vulcans. Yeah. Do we think Giovini was justified in what she did?
Ooh. Okay, to a degree, yes. I mean, she talked about the position that she was in. And I understand that. But also, she's in this situation and she says, well, I didn't want to kill anybody, but I had to do this thing, Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, you don't want to kill anybody, but you're going into situations where your only recourse is a lethal weapon.
Right.
Like, maybe don't take the sword, or at least leave it sheathed. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't use it unless you're forced to. I appreciate what Gabrielle had to say about the Qowat Milat saying, choose to live. Your path has come to an end, choose to live. I really like that. It's sort of the core theme of the episode. That's where we get our title. Yeah, and I think that's a really good thing to think about in our lives, that we do have different paths that we go on. Sometimes they begin and end in places we don't realize. Sometimes it's hard to figure out where our paths are going. And the choice to go in a new path when it's time is a choice to live, in the sense that staying where you are is stagnating.
Yes.
And is sort of wasting life and wasting time. And I really like that ethic, and I really like that principle. I don't like that principle on the point of a sword.
Well said.
I don't, and I don't like somebody deciding for someone else, your path ends this moment, and I will kill you if you don't agree with me. That, to me, is just, there's no way to explain that makes it ethically tenable. And so that's where I part ways with the Qowat Milat quite strongly, because I don't think that was justified. I don't think that was the way to. I understand the desperation that she was in and all of that, and I love that they are both respecting her culture and holding her accountable. That they're not trying to have it one way or the other. That they realize that these two things can exist in tension. That's really, really important. But at the same time, I think she was absolutely wrong to kill the guy. There are a million other things you can do before you kill someone.
Well, and I got the impression that the rest of the sisterhood would have agreed with you on that, right? Because that's why she was striking out.
I think
not
probably
quite
so.
On her own. She had some mercenaries with her, but I mean, so I don't think you're so much parting from the Qowat Milat as parting from Giovini, who has
perhaps
to some extent diverged from the Qowat Milat. And I also wondered about her reason that she felt she couldn't reveal the existence of the Abronians to the Federation. I didn't quite follow the logic there, and I did watch that scene several times. I can't imagine. I mean, okay, so the Federation doesn't give dilithium to individuals, okay, but I can't imagine the Federation not pledging themselves as well once they might know about the Abronians' existence. I didn't quite connect all the plot dots there, and maybe that's my fault. But
and that, well, I don't know that that's a fault. That just might be her perspective, and she might not. she might have. I think she made a judgment call that's understandable, maybe from an outsider's perspective or something like that. And I think she was probably just wrong, you know. But I think she had some, some basis for what she was doing, and she wasn't, she might have made the wrong assumption, but she made it in good faith, if that makes sense. I think she sincerely believed that was what she had to do, and I can certainly understand her perspective, and that's
Yes, I mean it was well written to that extent that yeah, she wasn't made out to be a villain,
right.
And it's interesting at the end that President Rillick's decision to remand her to Navarro's custody doesn't sit well with Michael Burnham, and Admiral Vance empathizes with her about that. And I like President Rillick a lot. I was so worried at that first episode that before it really got going, because by the end of the episode I knew what kind of character she was going to be. But I thought, here we go, another Federation bureaucrat who doesn't know what's what, know. But I really like Rillick. I think
I do too.
She is trying to balance a lot of competing interests at a very fragile time for the Federation and for Starfleet. And
and she's a good person to know how to do that. And I'm curious as to how that conversation between her and Burnham earlier in the season, I think it was in the first episode, about, when to make the tough calls and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to how that conversation is going to play out later. I feel like there's probably a lesson Burnham's going to have to learn, but I think
it's got to be. I mean, they wouldn't have put that in there if it wasn't going to lead to something.
Right. But I also feel like Rillick might learn a little bit too. We talked in our episode about how maybe there's some things that she's not saying because she's never been a Starfleet captain.
Yep.
So that's very interesting.
Well, that would be a very Star Trek way to do it, right?
It would.
People learning from each other, infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting. I discovered just tonight by chance, stumbling across it on YouTube, a deleted scene from Star Trek Into Darkness. It's the original ending to the scene in Captain Pike or Admiral Pike's office where he's taking command of the Enterprise back from Kirk.
Oh.
Apparently, I mean, I had to do a double take because after I believe, I haven't seen Into Darkness in a long time, but after I believe the scene we have, it continues, and Pike says, "You think you're infallible. You've got to learn." And it's a speech very similar to what Rillick gave Burnham in the pilot and the premiere episode of this season. So I guess Kurtzman had his hands in both projects. I don't quite know, but
true.
I mean, it sure seems like they salvaged some of that deleted scene to be now on this relationship between Rillick and Burnham. And so, if we continue the tracking in Into Darkness, Kirk had to learn about self-sacrifice, right? So I don't know what's waiting Burnham this season, but it'll be interesting to find out.
It will be. It will. Yeah, it was a really good episode, a really rich episode. Lots of interesting things to talk about in it. But I do think the sort of takeaway principle is that title, Choose to Live, and to really think about how and whether we are living our lives.
Yeah.
And there's such an idea, particularly in Christian culture, I think there's such an idea that like God has a plan for you, right? And so you got to figure out what God's plan is, and then you got to stick to the plan.
Right.
And it's going to be this, this thing that just, comes down from on high and is your path, as though you only have one. And
right.
I think we talked about this on the show. I don't know about how we did talk about this on the show, about how even my parents' generation was less likely than their parents to start a job when they were 18 and just work for one company for their whole lives and retire. And, I was a machinist for 45 years or 55 years or whatever, right? And that was it. Like, so part of that is culture shifting, but also part of that is But I think that reflects something that's going on in this ethic of choosing your path and or choosing to live and your path changing, as opposed to this idea that God has one plan for us.
Yeah.
I think when you live in a culture where you get one job and that defines you for the rest of your life, it's really easy to take that narrative that God has a plan for me and it's just going to be this one thing and I'm just going to do this one thing from here on out. It's really easy to fall into that and to believe that. But in a world where in a world where, in a world and in a culture where you don't necessarily have that to lean on, where life is happening on multiple levels at once, where we're shifting, where culture is shifting, where lives are shifting more frequently, and things are less clear, I think we do need to have that liberty to change open and available to us and recognize that it's not that God has one plan for your life, and if you make the wrong decision, you're off of God's plan, whatever.
Right.
There are paths that you take in life, and sometimes your path starts and sometimes your path ends. And yes, all of that is part of the movement of the divine. And yes, sometimes you miss the boat and sometimes you catch it. But that's what grace is for, and you're going to be okay. but keep that in mind that whatever the plan is, it's not that you have a script that you have to follow. It's that no matter what happens, God gets what God wants. And no matter where you go in this series of paths that are available to you, grace is there for you. And you can find a way out. You can choose to live no matter how far down a dead-end route you've seemed to go. So anyway, that really, that made sense to me. Again, not at the point of a sword, but but in that vein of choosing to live, wow, that goes back to the Adira and Gray story, because Adira, was in there and was so panicked about Gray,
right,
and was so worried about him, and then Hugh just kind of puts his arm around them and says, let's go for a walk. Like, let's breathe. We're going to get an alert if anything happens. And boy, I've had this in my life where you have someone you love who's in really bad shape and you need to know that you don't have to be there every second for them, because you need some space to be able to refuel yourself or refocus yourself to actually be there for them and not just bring your tension into the room. And so when they go away for a while and they refocus, then they're able to come back and really be there for Gray the way they need to be.
Right.
To hold his hand, to speak to him and to say, look, I don't know where you are. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to help you find your way. And holding on to his hand, treating that body like it's him, holding onto his hand and just lying down next to him and sleeping as they need to, and speaking to him and being that light, being that guide for him. Boy, that shift from their focus on, which really, it's all about Gray, but before they go on that walk with Hugh, they're focused on themselves and their own anxiety and their own fears for what might happen to Gray. And instead, when they come back, they're focused on Gray and what does Gray need from me right now?
Right.
What am I able to give him? What am I able to do? And I mean, they're doing the same thing. They're staying by his side, but they're staying by his side in a completely different way. And Gray says, I heard you. I heard your voice. Boy, this is another moment of Star Trek sort of affirming that there is more to our existence than our mere DNA, right?
Right.
This is just another one of those moments where it's like getting Spock's Katra back in his body. And so I just thought it was really, really beautiful to have this moment where the thing to do is to invest oneself in a person you can't see, in a person who doesn't really seem to be there, and to make an act of faith, to be a guiding light for somebody, to step outside of yourself, and and to act that's really it's just such an act of pure love. And so again, Gray kind of had Adira kind of had to choose to live, Adira
Yeah.
had to change paths and choose a new way to be, but then Gray also had to choose to live by finding his body and finding Adira through his body and coming back into his corporeal existence. So I just, I thought that was beautiful. I thought it was kind of a beautiful metaphor, a beautiful image. And
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, Wilson Cruz
oh,
may just be my favorite Star Trek Doctor. I mean,
oh yes.
I mean, I really am just so impressed with how he balances the medical duties with the counseling duties, like we mentioned last week. But Wilson Cruz plays Culber just so believably and authentically. I don't have any trouble accepting that one doctor could be that good.
Yeah. Oh, I
buy it,
agree.
so,
I agree. And it's so much about treating the whole person.
Yeah.
And boy,
yeah.
that's so important in Star Trek. I mean, it's the whole reason we had a counselor in Next Generation.
Right.
And bartenders and other people.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason I say. And really, that goes back to the cage.
Absolutely.
The doctor as counselor, to the captain is
Yep.
all the way back there. It's done in a very, sort of, 60s manly way.
Who wants a cold martini, a
Right.
warm martini?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's that, but it's there, But I think this
Yeah.
does more to address this thing that's been in Star Trek all along, which is we're not one thing or the other. We're both and. We're all these things at once. And to be holistic about who we are as human beings. Hugh Culber really represents that in this series, and I think beautifully so. And yeah, he's definitely a great Star Trek Doctor. Yeah. And Wilson Cruz is flipping awesome. I love it. So, I was on the interwebs earlier today. YouTube was up, and Larry Nemeczek was on doing a live stream thing with his Portal 47, and his subject line for his live stream was like, I don't remember, like a flood of anniversaries or something like that. You're talking about all the anniversaries in Star Trek, and we've had a lot of them, and we're a week behind on all of our movie anniversaries, but we're doing them. If Star Trek hadn't done that thing where they aired 2 episodes in 1 week, we would be
It's all
on the
Paramount's
button.
fault.
It's all Paramount's fault. It was an avalanche from the Mountain of Entertainment 1 week. But we have an avalanche of Star Trek anniversaries, and this past week was the 35th. Can you believe it? 35th anniversary of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, also known as There Be Whales Here.
The one with the whales.
The one
It is
with the
hard to
whales.
believe. My gosh. And I have to I have to make a liar out of myself, because it turns out, as I was thinking about this anniversary this week, that Star Trek First Contact was not the first time I tried to convince a non-Star Trek fan to see a Star Trek movie with me. I wanted my parents to see Star Trek 4 with me because I knew they would enjoy it, and my mom expressed actual interest first, and this one sounds like it might be pretty good, and so I let the unspoken corollary of that statement go, and so for my second viewing, I think my mother went with me and my Star Trek friend, and we had a little mother-son bonding over Star Trek through that movie.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
And the ticket was $4.
Nice.
That's worth 10 of today's dollars. I looked it up, but yeah.
Really? That's still, wow. Boy, those were the days, right?
Oh, those were the days, right?
Those were the days. Yeah. Well, I tell you, I didn't get to see it in the theater. The first one I saw in the theater was Star Trek 6.
Okay.
So, but I what happened was the year of the 25th anniversary, which was also the year of Star Trek 6.
Right.
They put out this this box set of the first 5 movies, and I don't know if I watched them all before I saw. This is VHS tapes, kids.
Yeah.
I don't know if I watched them all before I saw Star Trek 6, but I did watch them all. That's how I got to see Star Trek 4 for the first time, and oh, what a beautiful film! Star Trek 4 is. What a life affirming,
Yes.
just glorious. I have the music playing in my head right now, and it's just glorious.
That music really had to grow on me some. I mean, I liked it. I had the soundtrack, a cassette tape of the soundtrack, and I listened to it a lot. But it was so different from what James Horner had done for Star Trek 2 and 3. Actually, Leonard Nimoy was good friends with Leonard Rosenman and wanted Rosenman to score Star Trek 3, but I don't know why that didn't happen. He didn't get that until Star Trek 4. But so it's very different. And sometimes I've wished we could have heard what James Horner would have done with Star Trek 4, but it probably wouldn't have been as good because Star Trek 4 needs a lighter score.
Yeah,
because it's just it's a lighter story. And I know Leonard Nimoy said on several occasions he wanted to do a Star Trek movie where there was no bad guy per se,
Right.
And really the only bad guys in this story turn out to be short-sighted humanity in our era,
Right.
And my friend at the time pointed out the only weapon fired in that film is when Kirk shoots the doorknob in the hospital. The only phaser. There are weapons.
Yeah.
There's also the whale harpoon that hits the bird of prey instead, I guess. But yeah, it's a very non-violent film, very life-affirming, as you said, and very optimistic. And I just only grow to think more of it over the years because it's just got this attitude, this irrepressible Star Trek can-do attitude. Oh, we need to go back in time and find whales to save the Earth? Okay, here we go. I mean, it's not quite that cavalier, but there's just no real consideration of can we do that or not? Should we do that or not? It's Spock might have some trouble with the calculations, and McCoy's a little grousy about it at the beginning, but there's never a question of we're not going to do this.
Right.
It's just Kirk radios Starfleet headquarters. We're going to go back and attempt time travel and find humpback whales. And do you concur? Of course. What else would you do? So I've just really grown to love that over the years. As how, as we've said a few times recently about other movies like First Contact, this is a very atypical Star Trek movie in some ways because it's usually not such laugh out loud and sometimes slapstick comedy as most of this movie is. Not all, but most. But in other ways, it's very much the heart of Star Trek.
Yes, absolutely. Because it has so much to do with our connectedness to the rest of life.
Right.
To not just other beings like us, but other beings on our planet to whom we might not think we would relate. In so many ways, Star Trek, we go out into the stars and we try to communicate with beings who are so different from us, right? But in this one, we need to connect with beings who are very different from us on our own planet, and it's just as difficult in many ways as dealing with aliens, and yet it's so important that we need each other. Our interdependence upon one another, is so important, and of course that goes into creation care and ecology and all of those things where we're taking responsibility for how our actions affect our world.
And it's not just that we need each other. I agree with that. It's also that all the life forms have their own purpose and reason for being singly as well.
Yes.
One thing I love about this movie is that the creative choice was to not subtitle the conversation between the probe and the whales. And so some people have said, well, we don't know what they're saying. But you get, first of all, you get the gist from the action.
Right.
Once they communicate, the disaster passes, so all's good. But secondly, I think it goes to that point of showing that all life forms have their own existence that needs to be respected, as well as the interdependence that you rightly point out and lift up. And I think about as I look at creation as it's presented in the Bible, I think humans are created in the image of God, uniquely, the Bible says, but other species glorify God simply by existing, and God actively delights in them. Like, look at the book of Job, when God is kind of giving Job a dressing down, but God points to all these creatures, some of whom we don't even know for sure what the Bible writers were talking about, but all these animals and life forms that God's created, and seems to be taking pride in them. Like, look at that. Could you make something like that? Could you drag out Leviathan with a fish hook? Could you rustle up the hippopotamus? I'm paraphrasing, but so the point being, yes, you're right. There's this interdependence, and there's also this separate and equally valuable existence. Mm-hmm. And both those things are there in this movie, effortlessly, it seems. So
yeah, it's beautiful.
I like that about it.
And like you say, it doesn't matter what the message is. It matters that the communication takes place. Although, I mean, I think we do know what the whales said to the probe, which was, "To destroy the planet."
Right. They didn't say, "Keep on going. These humans really have it coming."
Sorry, I just had to do my Dory impression.
No, I like it. Yeah.
But no, I mean, you're right. I mean, the fact that the communication takes place, right? That's what matters. That the healing comes. That it's been restored. Yeah. That what we have damaged has been restored. That's the real point. If I can get a little theological with it, in the book, when I talk about Star Trek 4, I mean, this is coming at the end of Star Trek 2 and 3, which were, to me, setting out, doing the whole Gospel according to Star Trek journey. Yep. And the book, to me, 2 and 3 very obviously establish Spock as a Christ figure. And then, there was this movie, and, I was like, well, I'm going to watch it to finish out the trilogy. And, it's not important that, what it's about. It's just the fun one with the whales, whatever. I'll just watch it. And then I was like, oh no, Spock is Jesus in this movie, like quite profoundly so.
Right.
And one of the themes that I sent around on that regarding the whales is that, in Star Trek 2, if we're looking at Kirk as humanity, or Kirk as, Kirk is the Gaelic word for church, so Kirk can also be, I mean, not that it's intended that way at all, but it's just interesting to think about Kirk as the church.
Coincidence.
Yeah, it is a nice coincidence. Yeah, there are a lot of nice coincidences in this trilogy. Very nice coincidences. But, when we look at that, Khan comes at him, and I felt like Khan's function is very much sort of the function of sin. Very much the function of the accuser, to take anything that we've done wrong and make it everything that we are, and say that we deserve to die and to be this symbol of aging and death and all that sort of thing. And it's Khan that does that. And Khan is specifically written to mirror Ahab, who is from Moby Dick and is, a whale hunter who's out to get the whale who harmed him.
Yep.
And then in Star Trek 4, really it is humanity's sin. It is humanity's misdeeds. It's their short-sightedness and their blind ambition and their violation of their sacred call to care for the earth and all the creatures in it. They've really run counter to their calling, right? By really recklessly killing whales. And so there again, we have Khan as Ahab, the whale hunter, representing the sinfulness of humankind in Star Trek 2, and then in Star Trek 4, the sin of humankind is whale hunting. And it just, there's a lot of connective tissue between 2 and 4. Nice. Yeah, there's a lot of connective tissue between 2 and 4 because Nick Meyer, who co-wrote Star Trek 2, co-wrote Star Trek 4 and is responsible for much of the 80s stuff in there. And so it's really interesting to me. So I feel like Spock and everybody are coming to save the Earth, from destruction, to really save humanity from destruction because of their own sin, and restoring that which was lost, restoring that which was taken away, making all things new. And doing something that we can't do on our own, that we're helpless to do on our own. We're calling out, and saying that we're helpless to stop this, and saying, save yourselves. We certainly can't save ourselves,
right. Yeah. That's a great.
And so I just, so for me, that's the point of the whales coming back to Earth is restoring what was broken.
Yeah.
And broken by us and killing us.
Yeah. I mean, really, it for as fun a movie as it is, when you sit and ponder that, like, how many species have gone extinct, that we know about, that are the direct result of human activity.
Right.
It makes you wonder what, not only, what the impact of that will be on life on Earth, but also the theological impact of that, as we've talked about. And so this theme of caring for creation, I wanted to raise this question.
Yeah.
I really love Catherine Hick's performance in this film. I love her as Dr. Gillian Taylor, the best guest character, I think, or certainly one of the best in the films. And of course, she gets to live every fan's dream, right? Because she gets to go
right.
to the Star Trek world, that Star Trek place, as David calls it, at the end. But I have heard debate and haven't really engaged in it. But I'm curious what you think. Would it have been better for her to stay in her time and continue to work for greater awareness of caring for whales and other creatures, and would it have been better for her to stay and try to make her world better, or was the better choice for her to come to the future where, as she rightly points out, who in the 23rd century knows anything about whales?
Right.
So I've heard arguments on both sides, and it's interesting. Gillian Taylor shows up as a character in three separate short stories in the Strange New Worlds anthologies.
Wow.
Yeah. And I made a little list here, if you'll indulge me. One story in Strange New Worlds 6 by Juanita Nolte is called Whales Weep Not. It's set entirely in 1986. It's about a private detective investigating Gillian's disappearance.
Nice.
and it's a wonderfully fun story. And the detective goes through various scenes and people we saw in Star Trek IV, and he finally pieces it together. Spoilers for Whales Weep Not, which you should read. It's a great story. He kind of pieces it together, and the message he comes away with is he's not going to tell anybody, but he realizes what's happened, and he's glad to know there's a future out there, right? Oh. So it's a nice uplifting story at the end. Then in Strange New Worlds 4, we have a story by Michael J. Jasper called Scotty's Song, which is about Grace and George acclimating to the 23rd century, and there's some health problems involved, and Gillian and Scotty have to work to solve that. That's also a very good story. My favorite of the three, though, is in Strange New Worlds 2. It's by Peg Robinson. It's called The Hero of My Own Life. And it touches on Gillian wondering whether or not she did the right thing. And Peg wrote this beautiful passage near the end of the story about how Gillian had, quote, grabbed onto a transporter beam, a stranger's waist, and a scant hope. She wasn't defined by Kirk or by history, but by a willingness to dare.
Wow.
So on the one hand, you can interpret what she does as this willingness to dare. It's a beautiful story. All three are great stories. You should read them all. But on the other hand, I was struck by the image of this private detective kind of strolling through the aftermath of what Gillian leaves behind. Like bills are left unpaid, and her apartment's kind of a mess, and there's the pizza box. The pizza's gone uneaten. He's got the receipts for and also this wondering, because people in Gillian's life her landlady and others are wondering where she is, and so for all Gillian says, she has nothing. She did leave a life behind, and it's a life in which she could have chosen to live as someone whose path is continuing this good work she's doing. I mean, the science fiction aspect of it kind of puts a wrench in the works, but But what was the right? Would either choice have been valid? Was one more valid than the other? I've gone on a bit now, so I'll let you say what you think.
Well, no, I think that's fascinating, and I hadn't ever really thought about that before, because it's true. She could have stayed and continued her advocacy work, and yes, people in her time need to advocate for all sorts of things, not just the whales, but all sorts of other creatures.
Yeah, yeah.
But she has a particular passion for the whales, and it's important. And yeah, she could have done that. But again, I do think there is a particular need for her in the 23rd century that might be difficult to fill. And I think she's in a place and in a time where she feels confronted by something that she, at least on her own, feels fairly powerless against. Whereas in the 23rd century, I think she feels like there's something she can actually do, that she can actually contribute. I mean, to use probably a badly apropos metaphor, she feels like a small fish in a bigger pond, or a big fish in a smaller pond, I guess I should say. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When she goes to the 23rd century.
True.
And
true.
So there's not, and again, it's like I was talking about in the first half of the episode. There are many times when we can look at our lives and say, well, we could have gone this direction, I could have gone that direction. What was it that Saru said a couple of episodes ago? One cannot live all the lives one wishes.
Yeah,
right?
well, right.
A choice must be made. And she did make a choice, a very bold choice, very brash choice, which is very much in keeping with her character.
Yeah.
And a choice that I think, surely benefited the 23rd century. What difference did it make in the 20th century? We don't know. We can't know. And there's always that thing. And I'm a Back to the Future kid, so I'm very interested in not messing around with the space-time continuum. And I recognize also how one person can change the timeline, can change other people's lives and the world around them in ways they might not ever realize. And so, yeah, I mean, that's always been part of Gillian's story, that you have that worry or that concern about what could have been. But, I don't know. Everybody.
Well, no, I think you're circling back to your theological point about our path and our vocation earlier addresses that well. And of course, in the real world, none of us have the option of grabbing onto somebody in a transporter beam and going to the future. So I guess either way, I like how you framed it, that she's making a difference in both places, and she's making the bigger difference in the 23rd century. So maybe part of our discernment is, since we can't live all the lives at once, what life can we live that will make the biggest difference, either to ourselves in a beneficial way or to others in a beneficial way? And maybe those two aren't mutually exclusive much, if any of the time. Jesus does say, love your neighbor as yourself, and you can't love your neighbor unless you're loving yourself. So well, and I think the metaphor is not, even though, yes, we don't have the opportunity to hop into another life through time travel. Man, I'd be out of here. If I go to the 23rd century, I'm gone.
Right.
See ya.
Even though we don't have that option, we do, in very many ways, often shift from one life to another. Even just moving, just moving from one place to the next, one job to the next, leaving a relationship behind, losing someone you love, gaining a new relationship. I've always said that, you can change your entire life just by turning to someone else and saying hello. I mean,
so true.
Almost 30 years ago next year, I played a card game with a girl that my sister introduced me to. And my life has not been the same since. And I think our son would agree. No,
it's a good point. Yeah.
So, that's the nature of life. And so there again, we could debate all day about Gillian's choices, but ultimately it's up to Gillian. what she
That's
chooses.
also very true. Yeah.
Which makes, by the way, which makes God no less sovereign.
Right.
Because we do have free will. There is chaos in the universe. But the matrix of God's order in the universe absorbs that chaos and utilizes it. You see it in the structure of the universe itself, that the chaos that happens, the random things that happen are worked into the system. And that's, I think, exactly how the purpose of God and the will of God works. That's why I always say God gets what God wants. There's nothing, there's no chaos that we can introduce into our lives. There's no independent choices we can make that can wreck the plan of salvation history. And that's a beautiful thing to know. So, but yeah, I think Gillian makes such a strong, I don't know if I would do that, but it's a great moment because I talk sometimes about the phrase "beam me up, Scotty," and people always talk about that as like a misquote from Star Trek because nobody ever actually says that. Kirk or anybody else still never in all of Star Trek has anybody said "beam me up, Scotty." But I believe, and I think it's correct, that it actually comes from fandom. And it's people saying, I might have said this on the show before, I don't know, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but that it's people saying, like you just said, if I have a chance to go to the 23rd century, I'm taking it. I love the world of Star Trek. I love the Enterprise. I love what it means. Scotty, beam me up.
Right.
I want to be involved in Star Trek. And it's more like an expression of enthusiasm. But the closest in Star Trek anybody ever comes to saying that is in Star Trek 4, right before Gillian hops on Kirk's back. He says, Scotty, beam me up.
Yeah.
That's the closest anybody ever. Of course, he's asking to be beamed onto a Klingon ship through a Klingon communicator.
Oh, now you're quibbling.
I'm just saying it's that far off from what we're used to. But but that's when Gillian Grant. And so it is that, like you said, that fan moment of getting to be in the Star Trek world and getting to be a part of that, to fly off with Kirk and company to the 23rd century. And there's something about that. There's something about that moment of engagement and that the things that we long for and the things that we hope for can be real. I think that's very important. Again, just from a theological perspective and from a life perspective, recognizing that there are all these sorts of hopes and dreams and visions that we cling to, but that if we invest ourselves, and if we have faith and move forward in that faith, our faith can be sight. The things that we trust for, the things that we hope for can be real. And that's a beautiful moment.
It is a beautiful moment. It's interesting you mentioned how that saying came from fandom in that sense, because I think you're right. It can be that expression of enthusiastically wanting the better thing. But I've also seen it as an expression kind of resignation and maybe even despair, because I know I had at one point in my teenage years one of those baby on board style signs for the back window of your car. It said beam me up, Scotty, there's no intelligent life here.
right
And so that's kind of a cynical take on it, which I try not to fall into. But one other thing about this movie that strikes me in that regard, one of my most vivid, I have two very visceral emotional reactions to moments in the movie that I can still remember. But one of them is at the beginning of the film when the Klingon ambassador is making his case to the Federation Council or Starfleet Council or whoever it is, the Federation Council, I guess, about Kirk as a war criminal. I remember watching scenes I'd seen in Star Trek 2 and 3 with this new narrative around them and being so incensed and so outraged and so morally outraged at this. And I remember going back to my friend's house later and saying, and I couldn't believe the Klingon was saying those things. Remember, I'm like, 14 years old or something. I couldn't believe the Klingon was saying these things about Captain Kirk. And he said, well, that's what, it's a Klingon. What do you expect? Anyway, the point was, that was kind of like, I think, my first awareness of what we call fake news today. And taking facts and distorting them and twisting them or ignoring them or whatever to make a narrative that you want for a predetermined end. In the Klingon ambassador's case, he's named Camarag in the novel. I think it's a wonderful name, so I'm going to call him Camarag. In Camarag's case, he wants Kirk behind bars or killed or whatever. But so I think that was my first kind of awareness of how easily the truth can be twisted for nefarious ends. And I think that's something, as we talk about how can we invest ourselves to make our present more like Star Trek's future, investing ourselves in truth and in honesty and in getting all the information we can, which is something we've talked about before on this show in connection with Lower Decks, I think. Again, I think the seeds for that are in Star Trek 4 as well. It's such a quick scene. It's not one of even the highlights of the movie, but I remember just sitting there feeling so livid as Camarag spews out this false narrative about what had gone down in the last two movies.
Wow. That's glorious. And I love it. And it's true. It's so easy to do that. And I think even, we've seen that in other places. In Star Trek, I think of Admiral Satie in the Drumhead. Listing all of Kirk's faults, and often, maybe when you talk to the people from the temporal security, right, in Deep Space Nine, they're saying, yes, but you did this, and this, and yes, you can color things toward your particular end, and boy, I mean, people even do that. Well, not even. People frequently do that with scripture. We can take yeah.
So I can't imagine.
And this is why it's so important to have a sense of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and what those things are and where to find them, so that we know that truth is going to transcend any way people try to spin things. It's not just the words on the page, right? That there's more to it. Jesus, talks about that, I think, a great deal in his teachings, that there's a difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, or like we talked about justice and mercy. I think we talked about that last week. And so, there's so many ways in which people can control and manipulate information to their own ends, and being aware of that helps us to spot it. And that's one of the ways we can be lovers of truth in our culture. I think it's very good. Yeah, that's quite a what's the word? Quite a bonus feature from that particular film.
Well, it made an impression, and the other moment I still have a visceral, positive emotional reaction to is when they come up over the hull of the Excelsior in that travel pod, and you hear the original series fanfare kick in, and there's the glorious new Enterprise A, and it gives me goosebumps every time because I'm a hopeless nerd for that. But I think, I mean, that it's fan service at one level, I guess. But at another level, it's really earned. I mean, and the Enterprise, as you've said, as I think you say in your book, and we've said on the podcast, it's a microcosm of humanity, and this goes to your theme of all things being made new. The Enterprise is literally made new, and it's just a nice. It's really a lovely moment.
It is, and you're absolutely right, and that's I do talk about that in some depth in the book, because Kirk is going through this process of restoration from Star Trek 2 to 4. And the emergence of the new Enterprise is very much the culmination of that, the culmination of salvation, if you will, and it's not an Excelsior class,
Right.
It's the same ship, but Ralph Winter decided we should paint an A on it. And so we did. But it's literally the same model. I'm speaking from a production standpoint. Sorry.
Oh, right.
Ralph Winter is the producer who decided that the A should be on the NCC 1701. Sorry. But it's literally it's the same ship, but it's renewed, and it's restored, and it's literally their enterprise, their endeavor. It's their calling. And Kirk gets his calling back, his first best destiny, as Spock calls it in Star Trek II.
Yes.
And he's really right about that. And what he has done, too, is so biblical. It's Christian, it's Jewish, it's Hebraic. It's such a beautiful cyclical thing that he has done, because he sacrificed the Enterprise in Star Trek III.
Right.
To turn death into a fighting chance to live, as McCoy calls it. Even as Kirk is standing there questioning himself in that decision, but he sacrificed everything to pursue Spock, and has that restored to him. It's Job, but it's the restoration of creation. It's this idea that when you pursue God, when you pursue Christ, and you do that, sometimes you do have to seemingly come to the end of a path. Sometimes you do have to sacrifice something, give something up, or at least be willing to give those things up, to hold everything you have, including your faith, in an open hand, so that we don't hold on to things too tightly, and they are given back to you. It's restored to you. And there's that cyclical function of grace, that the old is new again, And
I think it's important that it's given back, but given back and then some.
Yes.
It is the Enterprise A. It's not just the same old. It's
not just the same old. It's and then some. It's good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. As the scripture says. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the promise of the restoration, the full restoration of creation, which I think is what Star Trek IV, symbolically for me, from a Christ figure angle, that's what Star Trek IV is really, really telling us, really about. And I think that's one reason we love these movies, Star Trek II, III, and IV, because they do so closely echo these themes, these ideas that are very close to the heart of the gospel. And it's not just that's because we have a natural hunger for the gospel, because the gospel is the truth of God unto salvation, but it's also because the truth of God unto salvation is such because it's bound up within that truth that it addresses the deep hungers of the human heart. And so from a theological angle, when you say, well, you're going to be drawn to the salvation of God, there's that. But then there's also the fact that just happens to be a very real human need. And so, of course, from a very earthly, very human angle, we also are drawn to that. And so there's kind of this ineffable quality about why that's such a great scene, why that's such a great moment, why that makes us feel so good. So maybe I'm
I
attempting...
couldn't quite put it into words.
So maybe I'm attempting to sort of F the ineffable as
now there's our episode title, Effing the Ineffable.
That's relating back to Samuel Beckett, but yeah, but nonetheless, I think it's good that we do that and articulate where we see these beautiful things reflected. And there's so much more in the book too, so go read the book.
Yes, I second that. And one thing before we leave this movie, speaking of not misrepresenting things, because the Klingon ambassador does misrepresent facts, and we talked about how it's important, especially as Christians, not to do that. Last week, I claimed that the trailer for First Contact included the "assimilate this" line, and that your friend, and you took from that maybe your friend had misled you into thinking but no, I went back and checked, and no trailer for First Contact includes "assimilate this." So I am retracting my statement and accurately representing the situation.
My friend is off the hook, and you have decameragged yourself.
Thank you. Yes.
It
and it feels so
sounds
good.
like you had some lesion or growth or something. I had this camera rack. It's been there for weeks.
Cleansed. My YouTube research has made me well.
Oh boy. Well, I hope we have honored Star Trek 4 with our discussion. It has certainly been a lively and interesting one, and it's a lively and interesting movie.
That's for sure.
About the impending destruction of the Earth. So light stuff. The funny one with the whales.
And as you often point out, with many colorful metaphors.
With many colorful metaphors. That is true. That is true. But very well written ones. So I think it's time that we discuss our audience question.
I can't wait to hear it. So, Kevin, our audience question this week comes out of a broader discussion that treads into some spoiler territory, so we're not going to give the full context. But the question itself is interesting and can be discussed on other levels. The question is Star Trek afraid to address immortality?
Yeah,
it's an interesting question. I think Star Trek has broached this topic of immortality a lot during its history. I think Star Trek will be immortal, but like one episode that springs to my mind is Requiem for Methuselah from the original series, where we meet Flint, who turns out to have been Da Vinci and Bach and Michelangelo and all sorts of famous other people, and he's just enduring immortality. I think just off the cuff, I would say that Star Trek does not posit immortality as a thing to be desired. I think Star Trek generally says that part of what gives life meaning is that it's finite. David quoted this line a few weeks ago, I think, from Star Trek Generations, where Picard says, "Time's not our enemy. Time is a gift, and it may never come again." I'm badly paraphrasing, but. So I think Star Trek, to the extent that it talks about immortality, it says it's not necessarily a good. I guess we can think of some immortal beings or entities, but even some of them, like think about the Red Jack entity in Wolf in the Fold, or the spinning dial of hate in Day of the Dove. These are immortal entities, but they just go around causing havoc and mayhem, and no good thing comes out of them. So I guess I would say on the whole, Star Trek says immortality not something to be desired. What do you think?
Well, generally, I think you're probably right, and I do think there's definitely, I think that is something of a message in Star Trek. I think there are beings that are. I'm thinking of the Guardian of Forever.
Oh, okay.
There are beings that sort of transcend time, or exist outside of time, or seem to live on perpetually. I'm thinking of the Traveler from Next Generation, and possibly even Wesley Crusher. There are those kinds of beings. There are those kinds of things in Star Trek, and just sort of relating to Gene Roddenberry's cosmology, Gene Roddenberry's theology. I know he believed in a perpetual existence beyond our lives. I don't know what he would have done with the concept of reincarnation, but certainly he had a sense that we go on to become one with the divine. So there is that sort of perpetual existence. But I do think there's a lot in Star Trek that does temper that idea. And the line you're talking about from Generations, from Picard, he's referring to Soren. And he says, "Someone once told me that time is a predator that stalks us all our lives. I rather believe that time is a companion who goes with us on the journey and reminds us to cherish every moment because they'll never come again."
Thank you. Yes, that's there.
Yeah, what we leave behind is not as important as how we lived. After all, number one, we're only mortal. And to which
he says, "Speak for yourself." Right?
Speak to yourself, sir. I plan to live forever.
Yeah.
in that cheeky, way that only Will Riker can.
Right.
But I mean, there is, and there is also in the 2-part episode Time's Arrow from season 5 into season 6 of Next Generation. Where Data's head is found in a cave, and it's like, okay, Data has a conversation with Geordi, where it's like, okay, we've just found out that you die at some point. Your head we found your detached head, and you die in the past somehow, but still, and he says, Data, this has got to bother you a little, and he said, well, I kind of expected that I would keep living on, that my friends would die and then I would make new friends and I would just keep going. But this tells me that I'm closer to being human because I'm mortal. And so the idea of mortality as essential to our humanity, yes, is a part of Star Trek, very much so.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in more recent iterations, and we won't go into the spoilerish territory regarding that, but we've seen that, I think, in a very pronounced way in some recent iterations of Star Trek as well. And I don't disagree with that idea necessarily, but I'm curious about what the prospect of immortality really means.
Well, I think Star Trek would definitely be opposed to some kind of boring immortality.
Agreed.
Like I haven't seen many Voyager episodes since they first aired, but one I did happen to see not too long ago was Death Wish. Is Quinn the other Q's name? I can't quite recall, but I know there's a Q entity who wants to die because he says the Q continuum, as I recall, I think I'm getting the details right, is just mind-numbingly boring, or at least he finds it so. I mean, obviously the John Delancey Q doesn't, but and that whole episode is an argument for not living forever in the sense of just to live forever,
Right.
Like that can't be the end in and of itself. The life has to mean something. And I'm amazed, coincidences or not, how all our discussions of all these different parts of the franchise are blending into each other tonight. Because, choosing to live and what we do with our path and so again, living forever simply to live forever, simply because you're afraid of death, I think Star Trek would say that's not good. I think Star Trek would affirm that mortality is part of the human condition. I think, and I know others read the stories differently, but I think the Bible says that too. I don't see the pronouncement of mortality in Genesis 3 as something necessarily being added. God says, today you will die. But I don't know that Genesis explicitly teaches we were created immortal, and I rather think we weren't, because some other verses say immortality belongs only to God. One other thing I wanted to mention, though, is that at the same time, it doesn't want us to live forever simply for the sake of living forever. I have noticed Star Trek as a whole generally doesn't look favorably upon aging either. I think of episodes like The Deadly Years. I think of episodes like Unnatural Selection, where, the problem facing the crew this week is everybody's getting old before their time, and it's terrible, and it's almost a fate worse than death. I don't know, maybe that's consistent. I now that I'm talking it through, what do you think? Does that jive that they could both not want immortality and not want aging?
Well, I don't think I necessarily agree with that. I think that age, certainly, there are parts of aging that I think are seen as burdensome, for sure.
Yeah.
But there's definitely the sense with those rapid aging episodes, you're looking at something where something unnatural is happening. Where something natural is happening in an unnatural way. So when I think about an episode like Half a Life, where David Ogden Stiers is guested as a guy who's aging to a certain point, and in his culture on his planet, that's when they euthanize their older citizens. Lwaxana is in love with him, and there's this whole struggle with her trying to get him to fight for his life. And that's the whole interesting thing. But the idea is that he should be allowed to age. And then you go back to Encounter at Farpoint, You have McCoy showing up at 137 years of age.
Good point.
And
Yep.
I mean, and that is the fact that he lives to be 137 and older. Who knows how long McCoy
Right.
lived canonically? Is a sign that technology has advanced and that humanity is better because we can live a whole lot longer.
Yeah.
Even the fact that Picard is in his 90s, the series, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Even though he's played by an actor who I don't think has he hit 80 yet?
I
Yeah, he has hit 80. He's 81.
Okay, just barely.
But he's playing somebody 10 years his senior.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that sort of thing in Star Trek, of people living a long time, and sometimes and I don't see a lot of characters who actually live naturally a long time for whom that is a bad thing. I think the Q episode from Voyager that you're talking about is an example, but again, that's perpetuating life for its mere perpetuation, continuing life just to continue living, even if you're not really living,
Yeah.
That's the question. So
yeah.
I do think so. I think aging is a good thing in Star Trek, as long as aging is flourishing, and that's really kind of the point, is the flourishing of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I will just say this about Star Trek and aging, that if you watch the rerun blocks on H&I Network, they're very clear-eyed about who their demographic is, because I've seen more commercials for the Medicare Give Back benefit and for other things addressed to seniors that make me think, oh boy, time marches on.
Oh wow, that's true. It does. So it's an interesting question. I don't know if we could land on a definitive answer, but it's an interesting topic. The subject of immortality in Star Trek, and be interested to hear what listeners at home think about how different episodes. And of course, when we talk about Star Trek, we're talking about so many writers over so many decades.
Yeah.
That, different writers are going to have different. Harlan Ellison's going to view longevity differently than Brandon Braga will, differently than Renee Echevarria will, differently than Michelle Paradise will. So you never know.
So Star Trek does not speak with one voice, is what you're saying.
It doesn't. Well,
necessarily.
Not necessarily. There's a lot of cohesion.
There is remarkable cohesion.
Cohesion. Almost biblical cohesion. When you think about all the writers that contribute to the Bible,
and in dialogue with each other, just like the books of the Bible. So
yes, definitely. So, that's interesting. That's another rabbit hole for another episode, folks. But anyway, I don't think Star Trek in general, or Star Trek's writers, are afraid of immortality. I think they would caution against it as a goal in and of itself. I do think that you think of an episode like This Side of Paradise, that the goal is flourishing, and if there's not flourishing, there's not truly life, and you should, hearkening back to the beginning of this episode, choose to live, bum bum bum, because there be whales here. I don't know, whatever. Harken back to our main title. All right. Well, thanks for that question. Please keep sending them in. We love answering them. Mike, what have we got going on next week?
So next week, we're going to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country.
Yes.
And we will also be talking about Season 4, Episode 4 of Star Trek Discovery, which is titled All is Possible. I can't imagine how we'll tie that to any Bible verses or anything.
I can't, that's really hard. That's almost as difficult as Lost and Found.
I know. They're just, they're giving us nothing to work with this year.
Nothing to work with at all.
Ugh.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, and I hope you will all join us for that discussion and see what we do with that very tricky title that Discovery is serving up. Plus, enjoy our discussion of Star Trek VI, the namesake of my original Undiscovered Country project from all those years ago. And so that's going to be a fun conversation. In the meantime, please like, rate, share, comment, and subscribe wherever you can do that. Also, send us your questions. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show.
You can support the show by using the support button on anchor.fm/GATST, or by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/gospeltrekpodcast. You can support the show, help us make good content, and get some cool perks as well.
And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and until next time.
I'm Mike Boteet.
And I'm Kevin Sinise, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.